So we're continuing to look at types of data and how they're organized. Today we're going to be working through two-way tables and then relative frequency two-way tables. Go and copy your goal down here. Still like to have you write it down in your workbook. Go ahead and pause so you can write this down without the video leaving you behind. Now, as we look at this, our goal for this section is we want to analyze and differentiate between the data in a two-way table and frequency and conditional frequency. And so those have a little bit. We'll define those deeper and see how they can give us a little bit more information than just a regular two-way table. So here's our introduction. Rachel is thinking about the data she and her mom collected for the average number of texts a person sends each day. So remember back to when we started this section, we had created a histogram and a box and whisker plot for this texting data where they surveyed 24 friends each. And so she started thinking about perhaps a two-way table of the data they collected would help convince her mom that she does not send an excessive amount of text for a teenager. The table separates each data point by age, teenager and adult, and by the average number of texts sent, more than 100 per day, less than 100 per day. So here's our two-way table for those texts. We have our outer portion, which you remember from the last section, so we call our marginal frequencies. And then our inner portion is what we call our joint frequencies. What I want you to do here now is write two observations. Any observations you may see is important to this table. And so go ahead and pause as you think about and write down these observations. Feel free to share and discuss these in your groups. So a couple observations that stand out to me is when I look at the breakdown of teenagers versus adults, there is a major split or major difference in the age groups of where they fall. So as you look at more than 100 texts per day, it's 20 for teenagers compared to just 2 for adults. But then we jump to less, it is 4 for teenagers and 22 for adults. So huge gaps there. And then observation number 2 is that even with those that are, there's still a majority, even though a small majority, of people surveyed that send less than 100 texts per day. And so as I look at that, in this case it'd be 26 out of the total of 48 people, with 24 being the midway point, so just 2 above, but still more than what is there for over 100 texts per day. So there needs to be a little work if she's going to try to convince her mom that she is normal in this, and may have to look at this data slightly differently than she currently is. So let's get some definitions here. So once Rachel realized there are a lot of ways to look at a set of data in a two-way table, she was self-motivated to learn about relative frequency tables and conditional frequencies. And if you want to go ahead and pause and Google those, you can do that as well. We'll talk about them a little bit as well, but Googling and looking those up is a good tool for you to learn how to use. When the data is written as a percent, this is called a relative frequency table. So up until this point, we've just been putting in data points or values In a relative frequency table, we're going to put in percents. And in this situation, the inner values represent a percent and are called conditional frequencies. And the conditional values in the relative frequency table can be calculated as percentages of the following: the whole table, which is relative frequency of the table, so pay attention to terminology here. The rows, so it's relative frequency of the rows, and the columns, so relative frequency of the columns. So it can be broken down into 3 distinct cases. And so as we look at a quick little two-way table here, generally this is our row, and then this would be a column for us. So you can compare them across the row, across the column, or you can look at the total amounts that's happening over here. And then I want a little reminder, because we've seen conditional before, so this idea of conditional probability, the probability of an event happening given another event already happened. So as we look at this, what is the percent of people who test positive given they have TB? So as we look at this one, we're looking at those who are given, we already know they have TB, so I'm going to exclude all of this data right here. And so we're relative, our condition is that they have TB, and then we want to know who tests positive, so our test positive is going to be 361 out of the 380, because our condition was that they already had TB. Now, as you dive more into stats, or you may have heard this before, that if you're creative, you can make stats say almost anything you want. So Rachel here is going to try to emphasize a portion of it that will benefit her argument. So Rachel wants to emphasize that a person's age makes a difference in the number of texts sent, which is important since she's a teenager herself and needs to differentiate herself from adults. The first thing she decided to do is focus on the row of values, and so you can see that this row is highlighted. So she could write conditional statements about the number of texts a person is likely to send based on their age. This is called a relative frequency of row, because we're looking at the row. Fill in the percentage of teenagers who, for each of the conditional frequencies in the highlighted row below. Now as we look at this, I'll go down and do the adults and people, and then you can do the teenagers. So as we look at this, we had adults, and there were 2 that sent more than, and since we're looking at the row, it's 2 out of 24, and we divide that, we get 0.083, and then continue for 3, so that's where we get the 8%. And then here you'd be 22 out of 24, and that's where we get the 91 or 0.9166667, which then, as we move that into a percent and round up, gives us that 92%. And then same thing, you look down at people, you have 22 divided by 48 and 26 divided by 48. So what I want you to do is go ahead and fill in the percentages for the teenagers. And so hopefully we got for percent of teenagers who send more than 100 texts per day, you had 20 over 24, which is 0.833, and so we'll put that at 83%. And then 4 divided by 24 gives us 0.1667 or 17%. Now if you notice, 83 plus 17 gives us 100. 8 plus 92 gives us 100. 46 plus 54 gives us 100. Now this direction does not work because we were just dealing with row only. And so it's relative to that row. All right, so a little time for observations. Since the percentages created focus on row values, all the conditional observations are specific to the information in the row. So what I want you to do is complete the following sentence for the relative frequency of the row. Of all teenagers in the survey, blank percent average more than 100 texts per day. And so as we go back and look, we see that 83% average more than 100 texts per day. All right, so what I want you to do under here is now write another statement based on the relative frequency of the row. Could be anything, could be the total, could be for adults, could be another one for teenagers. I want you to go ahead and add in your own here. Now as we look at this one, below is the relative frequency of the column. Notice that we are going vertically now with our solutions or percentages. This time all the percentages are calculated using the data and the column. So what I want you to do is write two conditional statements using the relative frequency of the column. So one example I will give you looking at this, and I think I have an error. This should be 9% there. And so as we look at this, we can say 91% of all people that send more than 100 texts per day are teenagers. All right, and so a couple of issues here, and this was fixed on your slides, just an issue on mine here. So this would be 100%, and then jumping over here, this is going to be 85%. This will give us 100%. And then this is only 50% and 50%. Okay, and then as we look at this one, again a couple adjustments. This should be 42. This should be 4. This one should be 8. This one should be 46. This one here is 50. This one here is 50. So again, just like we did on the previous, I want you to write two conditional distribution statements for the relative frequency of the whole table. So as I look at this one, I'm going to look at the adults that sent less than 100 texts per day. So we can say is 46% of everyone surveyed were adults who sent less than 100 texts per day. Now there's several other ones you could do. You have teenagers, adults, average more than 100 texts sent, average less than 100 texts sent, total population. So hopefully you can come up with 2 other conditional statements other than the one that I just gave you. So here's a link to Khan Academy practice. Now there's some videos in here and there's some hints like we did previously. You don't need to watch the videos unless it'll be helpful to you. What you need to do at a bare minimum is there's 4 rounds of practice. You have to get 3 questions in a row. When you're all done, you'll see your 3 that get check marked, and then you'll have the title for what section you're on. There's 4 sections are two-way frequency tables, reading two-way frequency tables, two-way relative frequency tables, and then reading two-way relative frequency tables. And so what you're going to do is you're going to have 4 pictures you're going to paste in here. And so one of them I will paste in here so that you can see exactly what I want you to paste at the end. So this is one of the titles. This is actually the second one. You can see what I have here is recognizing what the title is and then showing that you got 3 correct in a row. So you're going to end up with 4 of these pasted in here, 1 for each of the different sections. So two-way frequency tables, reading two-way frequency tables, which is the one that I have here, two-way relative frequency tables, and then reading two-way relative frequency tables. Now, again, if you want to watch the videos, you can. If you want to just use the hints, but all you need to do is get 3 correct in a row and then take a picture of that. Remember, as you go to take the picture of that, it is Control plus Shift plus what they call the window selector button, which is the button above the 6 as a rectangle and then 2 vertical lines. That'll give you a crosshair for your cursor, and then you can click and drag to get just a small part. That way you can get 4 of them on here. All right, and then this will be your homework, which will be due on Monday, and we will go over this, answer questions. So if it doesn't all quite make sense, we'll spend some time on Monday going over this, catching everyone up.